Come on to the next question that Millie Sheridan of Holyoke will ask of Deputy Sam Meswick of St Helier South, who's the Minister for Housing. Yes, Ms Sheridan.
Will the Minister advise whether he has any plans to enhance the accessibility of housing for young people, and how is he intending to address ongoing affordability challenges?
Minister.
Thank you. I acknowledge that Jersey has a housing crisis which poses an existential threat to our future prosperity. Young people are consistently telling us that the cost of housing is making many of them lose hope that they can look forward to happy and fulfilling lives here. We must listen to them. When I became Housing Minister 2 months ago, on my first day in office, I established a housing crisis emergency task force and began implementing measures to address it, including supporting islanders into home ownership. I launched the First Step Assisted Home Ownership Scheme last month, which uses a fund of £10 million to help young people with the cost of buying their first home. Improving the experience of islanders who rent their home, I'm planning to make changes to our rental laws to give tenants greater security in their homes, prevent unfair evictions, and protect them against excessive rent increases. I'm also reducing the age at which islanders can access social housing. I recently reduced the maximum age limit to 30 years old, and I will reduce it to 25 later this year. And finally, I'm helping young islanders at risk of homelessness, making sure they have access to accommodation and support and can live independently. There is much more to do to restore the confidence of young people that they have a government that will genuinely work to address their needs and give them hope for a better future here. I hope the start that we've made shows that we have the plan and determination to do this.
Supplemental question, Ms Sheridan.
Has the Minister considered reducing the age to 18 at which social housing can be accessed, as this would provide accessibility to care leavers?
Well, sir, I have previously served as Minister for Children, where I put forward the Care Leavers offer, which was something I was extremely proud of, and I'd like to see that further developed. So there are already pathways that can exist for care leavers to enter social housing beneath the ages that the limits currently set for social housing. But more broadly, yes, I would like the age limit for social housing to come as low as possible, because I think the waiting list for social housing ought to allow anybody on it who's in need, and we shouldn't exclude people because they don't tick this box or they don't tick that box. But in order to do so in a fair way that doesn't overwhelm the waiting list and give people false hope, we also need to make sure that we increase the amount of social housing that we provide so that people who apply can get a home in a timely fashion and aren't left languishing potentially for months or even years on a waiting list when a home's not available for them. But if we can demonstrate that we can do that, then yes, we ought to get that age criteria down as low as possible.
Further supplemental question for anybody for the Minister? Sierra.
Does the Minister acknowledge that building one-bedroom flats is not the answer towards tackling this crisis?
I don't accept that it's the only answer, because we do have a demonstrable need for family-sized homes with open space and all of the amenities that we know particularly young children deserve to enjoy as they're growing up. And we've had some challenges in building those new homes, partly because of some of the lack of investment in infrastructure that there's been in recent years. We have zones that are waiting to have 3-bedroom family homes built on them, and we can't go ahead with them yet because they don't have the drains connected, which is extremely frustrating. So we need to resolve that and get building some of those homes. But I would say it's not either or, because there is also a demonstrable need, although it's often not recognised, for 1- and 2-bedroom flats. We have waiting lists for those flats, so there clearly are people who want them. And the more of those that we can build and provide good financial support for young people to buy rather than rent, at least that provides a step on the ladder where from their wages they're investing in their own property ownership rather than going to the private rental sector and paying someone else's mortgage for them. And once you pay your own mortgage and have your own home, whether it's a one-bedroom flat or otherwise, it's a step to then help you find it easier to move into a 2 or 3 bedroom home. So I don't think it should be either or. We should be building homes of a variety of different tenures and mixes, so everybody can have faith that they have that pathway up into their desirable family home at the end of it.
Have a supplemental question for that, Zira?
Thank you, Minister, for the good response. For the Horizon flats are extremely small. So will the Minister consider extending the minimal size of which a flat room can have?
Thank you. I totally agree about those homes at Horizon, and I was the member who exposed the fact that of the one-bedroom homes in the Horizon development, not one single one of them meets the minimum space standards for a couple to live in, yet they are charged out, many of them for rent, at a level that you would have to have 2 incomes to be able to rent them without living in rental stress. And I think that was a grotesque failure of planning in the past that has built those kind of homes that are clearly inappropriate for our needs. But I am very pleased to say that because of a proposition that was brought by my colleague, Deputy Tom Coles, we are going to increase the minimum space standards for new one-bedroom flats by abolishing single-person occupancy. They can now only meet 2-person occupancy, which means that people living together as a couple will have that space around them and not be crammed into a home that's clearly unsuitable for them because of the cost needs. And that's something that's only recently been agreed, so it's still got time to actually be implemented and have those kind of homes starting to be built. But I was very pleased to support Deputy Coles when he brought that proposition because it was the right thing to do.
Any other supplemental questions to the Minister? Yes, Ms Bringett.
Has the Minister considered using brownfield sites on the island, which will help lower the time for plumbing and electricity?
Yes, indeed. It was not that long ago that we went through the process of putting an island plan together, which is the document that guides us on what kinds of developments are allowed to be approved. I took the view in that process that I'm very keen to protect as much of Jersey's open green space as possible. And in order to do that, that means making every effort we can to prioritise using what we've already got to a better and more effective extent. That includes getting empty properties back into use because we're all aware of those homes that exist around the island boarded up and nobody can figure out why. And focusing on those sites that have already been developed so that they can be redeveloped in a more appropriate way to get those homes on those sites. It's in terms of trying to keep young people believing they can have a decent future in Jersey, affordability is obviously a huge part of that, but we've also got to keep what's so special about Jersey protected as well, and that means protecting our open green spaces too. And the more effective use we get of our built-up environment, the easier it becomes to justify protecting those green spaces too.
Supplemental question, Ms Bringett. Ms Duxbury? Sorry, I called upon Ms Duxbury. If you want to ask a question, if you put your light on until I've nodded to you, then I've got your name written down and I know that you want to ask a question. So I'm assuming that you want to ask the next question? Very well. Ms Duxbury, yes.
Does the Minister plan to further subsidise buying houses on return from university to ensure the return of young islanders?
Minister.
Yes, so we recently launched the First Step scheme, which I mentioned here. That is a system where we provide people with equity loans to help them bridge the gap of affordability to help them buy a home. So say, for example, a home's for sale, it's great and they want it, but they could probably only get a mortgage for maybe 70% of it or something like that. The government can provide that 30% to help bridge that gap. We've only just launched that and lots of people have been applying for it. I'm really proud of that and I'm looking forward to passing on those loans to people so that they can start buying those homes. I'm hoping that if we can prove it's a success, then I've got a stronger case to then say to my colleagues, we've used £10 million for that initial scheme, could we have some more? Because the more that we get to that, the more we can help more people. And I would urge any young person who wants to benefit from a scheme like that, we live in a democracy, so please contact your states members and urge them to get behind efforts to increase access to that scheme and get more funding to it so that we can help as many young people as possible get their first home.
Supplementary question, Mr. Uxbridge? Ms. Tregario.
On the previous topic of the increasing waiting list, what steps have been taken to decrease the rising numbers of people on the waiting list for social housing?
Well, the number one thing to do is to provide more social housing. That means to build more, which we've been really successful at doing in the last 10 years. It also means buying more homes to bring them into the social sector, and I was really pleased to fight for and win with a set of homes called Spencer Close a couple of years ago. When they were being sold, we swooped in and were able to buy them and bring them into the affordable sector as well. The more homes that you've got at your disposal in the social housing sector, the easier it is to justify allowing people onto that waiting list so that they can apply and hopefully have a degree of choice as well, so they don't necessarily get forced into homes that aren't suitable for them, but ones that are more likely to provide them with the space and the environment that they need to have a decent life. But that's number one, it's providing more social housing so that we can justify allowing more people onto the waiting list for it.
A supplemental question to that, Mr. Tregario? Any other questions for this Minister on this topic? Yes, Ms. Patrick.
Can the Minister offer a timescale in which he hopes to see any tangible improvement within the housing crisis?
That's a very good question. So I mentioned earlier that I founded the Housing Crisis Emergency Task Force on my first day in office, and that was a sign at how seriously we take this issue. I believe that in the years running up to that, successive governments had not shown that real commitment that's needed to address the housing crisis. But I'm not going to stand up and say we can wave a magic wand and fix it in the short term. It's going to take a lot of time to do that. There are lots of different angles we need to approach. So the First Step scheme, that's going to start paying equity loans out relatively soon. So for those people, that's going to have an impact really soon. We've lowered the age limit for social housing. That's going to help people really soon. But I mentioned that I want to change the law on how rental tenancies are governed. That's going to take a bit of time to get that written up and hopefully get it approved in this Assembly and in force. So even though I'd desperately love to do that tomorrow and get on with it, because it's a complex piece of work, that takes a little bit longer. But I'm hoping in this term of office that this government has remaining, which is just over 2 years, I'm hoping we'll be able to point out some very clear improvements that have been made in that time and say to the public, you know, we really did try on this and made some achievements, because I think we've had too many years of failure up until this point.
Supplemental question, Ms. Patrick. Does anyone else have a question for this Minister on this topic? Final supplementary question, Ms. Sheridan, if you wish.
In relation to the equity loans, would they have interest?
Minister.
No, they don't have interest on them, which is very important, because I think if you are requiring people to build up interest and pay it back as you go along, well, that's just another cost on top of the mortgage to make it less accessible. So the way that we've set this up is that there's no interest on the loan, but the value of the loan will go up or down along with the value of the home. So if you had a 20% equity loan of a home of a particular value, if it increased in value over the time you lived there, when you wanted to sell it, you would then pay back at the same rate of increase that the value of the home has increased, but you just use the money that you've received from the sale to pay it back. So that's a way of mitigating the costs. And it essentially means that for your day-to-day living and paying your bills and paying your mortgage, it's basically irrelevant. It only becomes relevant at the point of sale. And by that point, hopefully you're in a good position to then move on to your second home, which may be a bigger home because you're looking at starting a family. So by scaling it that way, it mitigates the impact it has on people when they first need to get their foot on the ladder, which is the most difficult part of your journey into home ownership.
Very much, Minister. The next question, Maria Strigario of Holia will ask